cue when we are all live, right?
Right.
Yep. Okay, I
Okay.
think this is meeting is been. I think it's working.
It's working.
We are all live, right?
And you can go ahead now, Namrata.
Good evening, everyone from Nepal. Greetings and welcome to this Sapan event titled Beyond COP29 South Asia's Climate Challenges, a call for South Asian solidarity. I'm Namrata Sharma, a journalist and Sapan member based in Nepal, and I'm going to be your host for today's program. There is an urgent need for climate finance to assist developing nations in combating climate change. This was decided by policymakers, climate activists, and advocacy groups at the 29th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, COP29, in Baku, Azerbaijan, which just happened. South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world, being home to a quarter of the world population with remarkable environmental diversity. South Asia faces a unique set of geographical and environmental challenges. These include climate related disasters such as flooding, droughts, rising sea levels, glacial melt, and heat waves. With its high climate change vulnerability and poor resources, the region requires substantial financial support to tackle these challenges. This is crucial to help South Asian nations mitigate the effects of climate change and adapt. However, the diversity in the technical expertise, policy frameworks, and environmental conditions across the region present complex obstacles in implementing practical climate actions. Hence, we at Sapan present this important and urgent webinar where we all delve into the implications of South Asian countries, focusing on how the outcomes address its unique challenges. We will try to explore whether COP29 has adequately supported the region's countries and highlight the crucial role of climate finance in this situation. We will examine whether COP29 has delivered justice for South Asians, most vulnerable nations, and explore how the global community can support the region to tackle the urgent climate challenges it faces. But before we proceed with our discussions, some brief house rules, please. Please mute your microphone and introduce yourselves in the chat. Use the chat for questions or comments. Stay on the topic and please be respectful. Be patient and with technical difficulties. We sometimes have that. As always, we invite suggestions and feedback from everyone, please. I will now hand it over to Arjasri Chakma, activist from Bangladesh, to present the Sapan founding charter. Over to you, Arjasri.
Thank you, Namrataji. So, the South Asia Peace Action Network is an alliance of individuals and representatives of various organizations joining hands for a minimum common agenda, South Asia Peace. So, in doing so, we reiterate our commitment to take forward the principles and ideals of peace, justice, democracy, and human rights articulated by visionaries like Dr. Mubashir Hassan, Nikhil Chakrabarti, Asma Jahangir, Nirmal Deshpande, Kuldeep Nair, Rajni Kothari, among others, a visa-free South Asia or Confederation of Nations with soft borders. A region in which nation ensures quality education, justice, and freedom of expression and religion to its own citizens, as well as support and solidarity to those of the other nations. The South Asia Peace Action Networks calls on the governments and peoples of South Asia to work towards instituting soft borders, visa-free South Asia, visa on arrival, or at least ease of visas and economic cooperation to allow freedom of trade and to travel to each other's countries. Ensuring human rights and dignity for all their citizens, including religious and ethnic minorities, women, children, and other oppressed communities. Collaboration and cooperation in all areas, particularly related to public health, culture and legal reform, education, environment, climate change, water issues, disarmament, demilitarization, and denuclearization. It has been endorsed by over 90 individuals and over 100 organizations. I hereby give it to my colleague Pragan Sivastava to read the memoriam. Thank you.
Jashri, Bina, would you share the screen for the memoriam? Here, Jashri, and greetings everyone. Sapan events traditionally begin by honoring those whose legacy we take forward, as well as remembering those who departed over the past month. They devoted their lives as for peace building in the region. I would like to thank my fellow peacemonger Sarah Arshad in Lahore for preparing the slides, who could unfortunately not join us for this event. Papia Server, Halal Hafiz, Zakir Hussain, Tulsi Gowda, Shyam Benegal, Bapsi Sidhwa, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Thank you. We will now have a moment of silence to honor the departed. Thank you. Back to you, Namrata.
Thank you, Pragyan, for that moving presentation. Our memoriam always touches me a lot. We now come to our panel discussion, moderated by Afia Salam, a well-known journalist, teacher, and development practitioner from Pakistan. She has an MA in geography and has covered cricket, aviation, and over the past years, focused on communications and advocacy for environment and climate change. Besides conducting trainings about how to communicate on these issues, she focuses on the nexus of gender and media ethics. She also volunteers with organizations working on conservation, as well as community-based adaptation and disaster resilience. She is a member of the National Climate Change Council and the National Coordinating Body for Marine Protected Areas in Pakistan. She is also an advisor to Sapan News. Over to you, Afia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Namrata, for this very generous introduction. And I'm truly honored and humbled to be moderating a panel with such, distinguished panelists from across our region who know the problems, who are very articulate at global and regional forums, who write about them, who speak about them at policy forums, and who are making a very clear difference through their work, through their activism, and through their writings by bringing out the issues that matter. The way we will take it is that I'll introduce my panelists first, and then we will ask the questions in line with the with the topic of today's seminar. The session will be about 50 minutes, but we will reserve at least the last 10 to 12, 15 minutes for question answers from the audience. Allow me to now introduce my very distinguished panelist. We have Harjeet Singh from India. He's an activist advocating for climate and social justice globally. He is the founding director of Stat Sampada Climate Foundation. Please correct me if I've pronounced it incorrectly, Harjeet. He specializes in advancing just transitions, strengthening adaptation and resilience programs, and addressing climate impacts and migration. Harjeet also serves as a strategic advisor to Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, which is something that now, garnering increasing interest and attention, and which is gives us hope that maybe there is a way forward despite the COP29 proving to be such a disappointment, like most of the previous COPs. Previously, he served as the head of global political strategy at Climate Action Network International and led ActionAid's Global Climate Justice Program. Harjeet has also held board positions of CAN International and the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction. Currently, he's a member of the UN Technical Expert Groups on Comprehensive Risk Management under the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. Harjeet has authored and overseen numerous publications on climate justice and disaster resilience. Welcome, Harjeet.
Thank you so much, Afia.
Thank you. Aisha Khan from Pakistan works at the community and policy level to strengthen climate action by supporting inclusive and participatory practices that promote social, ecological, and democratic equity. She's a member on the board of directors of several organizations and provides expert advice on climate change-related adaptation and mitigation challenges. She is currently serving as the convener of the working group on climate security or the Strategic Policy Planning Cell, National Security Division. She is also part of the External Advisory Council of the World Bank on developing the South Asia Region Climate Change Action Plan 2020 to 2025. So absolutely the right person to be speaking at this forum. She contributes articles to newspapers and magazines and takes part in national and international discourse on climate change. In 2019, she was awarded the Bright Award for Environmental Sustainability at Stanford University. And in 2021, she was awarded with the rank of the Officer in the National Order of Merit by the government of France. Kunda Dixit from Nepal. He's from my fraternity. He's a journalist and very happy to have him here. He's a publisher of Nepali Times in Kathmandu and the author of several books, including Dateline Earth, Journalism as if the Planet Mattered. He is also a journalism professor specializing in the interface between media and the climate. Former regional editor of Interpress Service, Asia Pacific. He's also founding director of Panos South Asia in Kathmandu, which also had a very robust presence in Pakistan and trained many journalists into how to report on climate change and environmental matters when it was really not the thing in those days. So thank you so much for this. We are very honored also to have Dr. Suborna Barua, who is a professor of finance at Bangladesh University of Dhaka's Department of International Business. He specializes in climate finance. He has extensive experience in climate, in climate finance, sustainability, and policy advisory. He's currently a technical committee member for climate finance proposal evaluation at Bangladesh's Ministry of Finance and has worked as a climate finance consultant for GIZ, which is a German organization in Bangladesh. He has contributed to major international and domestic projects with organizations such as the World Bank, ADB, UNDP, and the government of Bangladesh, focusing on topics like carbon finance, impact of investment, and ESG, which is environment, social, and governance. Dr. Barua is a green finance advisor to Green Tiger EV Limited and is helping set up the localized carbon trade exchange platform in Bangladesh. He has published a book on green banking and authored over 40 articles on sustainable finance. His research interests include sustainable development and AI applications in finance, which is the new field everybody now needs to, get their head around. He holds a PhD from Federation University Australia and BBA and MBA from the University of Dhaka. He has taught at Jagannath University and United International University and worked as a research associate at the Institute of Inclusive Finance and Development. I really feel honored and privileged and more than a little overwhelmed, at having the opportunity to moderate a panel with such distinguished people. In the time allotted to us, we'll take about 45 minutes. I'll open the question where I will give 5 minutes each to all panelists to actually take us through on their thoughts of the topic chosen by Sapan as the first post-COP webinar. And, this is because once the COP ended, all of us, along with a lot of people everywhere in the world, were quite disappointed at the way things panned out. And there were expectations not just of the earlier commitments being met, which obviously focused on the emissions cuts, but also to make available the finance for the vulnerable countries. And as a bloc, South Asia has so many of the vulnerable countries. So, Harjeet, would you like to go first? And is that disappointment in the outcome of the COP29? Is it overrated? Is it overhyped? Or were we expecting too much?
Thank you very much, Afia. And I share your excitement by joining this such an august panel and with my friends, comrades, and allies. I'm on leave, but I still wanted to join this discussion because this is an important conversation. And as you said, Afia, the way we saw COP29 really not delivering, and of course, many previous COPs, but this COP particularly was important because we knew how finance, and it was touted as a finance COP, is absolutely central to every action that we are taking and how we need to really scale up. And that's why we, as climate activists, really called it a betrayal, because the outcome is woefully inadequate in terms of what is needed on ground, and particularly for a region like ours, which is disproportionately affected by climate change. And the kind of commitment that has been made to just offer $300 billion annually by developed countries. And in fact, if you look at the analysis that came while in Baku and later, it's very clear that they really don't have to provide any additional money to meet this target. So really, it looks like we are largely on our own, and the figure of $300 billion or even the roadmap that they are talking about, which developing countries demanded to provide at least $1.3 trillion annually, is something that we need to now figure out how we really make it real. But so far, if you look at, it's really a false hope if we rely only on what has been promised so far. So clearly, we as South Asian nations have to take notice of how COPs have been failing, not just this one, and for the last several decades. And we also see how impacts have been rising continuously. And no commitments coming from developed countries, even in that number, how much is going to be grants. And especially when you look at the number of disasters we have seen in the last few years, and Pakistan floods were a classic example of how the cost is now running into hundreds of billions of dollars if you really see those impacts increasing. So, and the reliance on carbon markets, which was also again celebrated as one of the outcomes, we know that the weak rules and double counting and false solutions are not going to work for a region like ours or even other vulnerable countries. So, very clearly, the deal is inadequate to support developing countries, and it's full of empty promises. So the analysis that's really coming out is absolutely right. And that's why we don't want to create, as I said earlier, any false hope. And a lot of responsibility now lies on us as civil society to really make sure that the road ahead between now and COP29, COP30 is the deal dealt with in such a manner that the only hope that we see now, which is now called as Baku to Belém roadmap, is really made real. And for a region like ours, which is highly vulnerable, but at the same time has resources, I think we also have a responsibility to take a lot of action on our own and continue to put pressure on developed countries who have a historical responsibility to not only take action at home, but also to support developing countries. And I must end by saying that we have seen a lot of hypocrisy coming from these historical polluters who, on one hand, put pressure on our countries in the developing world to move away from fossil fuels, but they are the ones who are expanding fossil fuels. So just 5 countries, Australia, Canada, UK, US, and Norway, are responsible for more than 50% of fossil fuel expansion between now and 2050. So I think it's really important for us to take action ourselves, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later on, how we can cooperate and what we can do as a region, but continuing to demand accountability from the historical polluters. Thank you. Over to you. And I'm happy to come in later.
Thank you very much. And you're so right. You use some very, very strong words. And before I move on to Aisha, we would like to remember how this process works and how vulnerable we are and where we are in the Committee of Nations and what our expectations are. And we would like to replay for many people may not have seen it when it was played. Our late colleague, Dr. Salimul Haq, when he spoke about all these issues on the eve of COP26, because he could not be here in our panel discussion, and he sent this message. And I think it sort of contextualizes the problems of South Asia. So let's just have a listen. The sound. Just bear with us, please.
Can you not hear?
We couldn't hear him.
Okay.
Could you hear? Can everybody hear him?
No.
It
was working before when we tried it, so I don't know.
Just a few
Veena
minutes
can't
ago.
hear it now.
Yeah, no, I've stopped it because when we tried it earlier, we could hear, but now we could not. So let me just share the link in the chat and people can hear later. Is that okay? Because I don't know what the issue is.
Okay, because it was
hang on,
working just
I
fine
got it.
just a few minutes ago.
I got it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let's just hear
Sorry.
him. So he has a huge contribution to this conversation.
My apologies for not being able to
Hang
join
on.
you live.
Hang on. Sorry. Can you hear now?
Yeah, we could hear it.
Okay.
My apologies for not being able to join you live, but thank you for inviting me to give you a video statement. So my area of work is climate change. I work on the impacts of climate change in developing countries, particularly on the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable countries around the world, but in particular in Asia and in South Asia, obviously in my country, Bangladesh, which is one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, with 170 million people living in less than 150,000 square kilometers, one of the highest density populations in the world. At the same time, sitting on a delta of 2 of the world's biggest rivers, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, which makes it very susceptible to periodic flooding, which is going to get worse and has indeed already got worse, and also from cyclonic storms that come from the Bay of Bengal and hit Bangladesh as well as India and Myanmar every now and then as well. So this region of the world, South Asia, has already been identified at the global level as one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. All the countries in the region, Bangladesh, India, and the other countries in South Asia, all of them are quite vulnerable to different aspects of climate change, ranging from cyclonic storms, as I said, from the seas, both the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal side, as well as from glacier ice melt in the high Himalayas in countries like Bhutan and Nepal, and also flooding in the major rivers, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra in our part of the world, and also the Indus and the other rivers in the South Asia region. And also droughts and heat waves. These are an increasing phenomena that we are now seeing in many parts of the subcontinent as well. So the subcontinent of South Asia is amongst the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. However, that's not the whole story. It's not just a question of vulnerability. We have known about this for some time now, well over 10 years, and we have been acting. We have been preparing ourselves to deal with that impact of climate change. We have worked out which are the most vulnerable places, which are the most vulnerable communities, and we are working collectively, both the governments and civil society and other stakeholders, including academia, that I represent, the research establishments, we have all been looking at what are the most vulnerable places and people, and how can we help those most vulnerable to prepare themselves and adapt for the impacts of climate change that are going to come, and indeed are actually now coming. So this year, 2021, has seen a crossover from climate change being a problem of the future to climate change being a problem of the present. The sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change scientists, working group one in the scientific working group, have very unequivocally said in their latest report that came out in August of this year that we can now see the evidence of human-induced climate change due to 1 degree or more increase since the Industrial Revolution. And therefore, we now have to be prepared. We have entered what I call the era of loss and damage from climate change, no longer just reducing emissions, which we call mitigation, or adapting to climate change, but also now having to do loss and damage, deal with loss and damage, minimize it, avert it, and unfortunately also address it after it has happened. And in this part of the world, it's an issue that we need to be taking seriously. And I hope that everybody in South Asia will be made aware of this problem. I think the level of awareness is already quite high. It needs to be even higher. And we need to move from awareness to actions as quickly as possible. And that's where I think we can all collaborate together. Thank you.
So this actually sets in context why we in South Asia need to come together. And I will go to Aisha now. Aisha, there are, Salimullah Saab, may he rest in peace, has also articulated his disappointment and also the necessity of talking not only about the emissions cuts where we have fallen short, but he introduced the word, he focused on loss and damage, and we finally saw it through. And now, after the process, we are still unsure of how we will get there. And we've graduated from talking about 100 billion per year, million per year, then we went on to billions, now we're talking trillions, and yet the gap keeps increasing. So do we look within our region? Do we still keep asking the perpetrators? How do you think that we can take this conversation forward and close that gap?
Thanks, Afia. Lovely to be here. I'm new to this platform and feel very privileged and honored that you've made me part of this important conversation. And I'll share my thoughts on the COP a little bit, and on within COP how L&D is treated. I think this COP29 took place in the backdrop of 3 consecutive years with the warmest temperatures. We also saw multiple disasters that took place. There were wildfires, there were droughts, there were geopolitical conflicts, there was a sharp increase in cost of living, inflation. So I think the mood was already sour and people were highly frustrated with what was happening in the world. And the COP itself had been touted as a negotiation platform this year for action and ambition. So both in action, it was supposed to take the global stocktake agenda forward, and in ambition, it was supposed to augment the finance and at least make a commitment that was closer to what the global community and the vulnerable countries were asking as the floor, which it did not meet. So although you can say that from 100 billion, it jumped to 300 billion, this still felt, as Harjeet keeps saying, woefully inadequate to meet the needs. So there was a lot of disappointment, I think, and disgruntlement with this COP because it failed to keep up pace with the expectations of the people. And in action, when you talk about the mitigation working group, or you talk about the global gap on adaptation, or you talk about the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, there were no firm commitments made. And on L&D, other than pledges and encouraging people to pledge more, nothing else was done. And gender component was completely missing. So from many angles, there was a lack of, you can say, faith in the multilateral system itself. and relying on that to take us safely through this passage of time between now and 2030, when emissions are supposed to come down to 1.5 to keep the world safe. But as Harjeet said, and Dr. Salimul Haq also before me, I think it is being delusional to think that the solutions that we're looking for will come from the global community. We have seen this is the 29th year of negotiations, and the needle has not moved forward at the pace that we expected it to move. And things are not within our control at the global platform because the decisions that are made at these platforms are by consensus. So they're not the majority voices that prevail over there, which is always going to be a disadvantage. In terms of losses and damage, I think South Asia is going to face a huge challenge. And we have to start looking inward within ourselves as a region. And I've said that repeatedly, that unless we cannot overcome the differences that we have and start working together collaboratively and collectively, we will not be able to address the issues that we can at least tackle. And there's so many that we can tackle because there are examples of best practices in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of early warning systems, in terms of more effective gender action plans and empowerment. So we can start doing that if we decouple politics from climate change and we agree to advance and move forward in areas where it is mutually beneficial for countries to collaborate. So I think that, when we talk about South Asia, there's certain fundamentals on which we first need to agree. None of us can deny that we are part of geographic entity. Within that, there are challenges that we face that we have to handle collectively because we are collected by land, by air, by water. If this is one, and we don't discriminate between people, and we say this is people-centered approach, and we have to look after everyone and care about and try to work to strengthen the resilience of the entire region, because without that, the spillover effect from one region to the other is going to have an impact on the development ambitions of the other country itself. So it's all so closely interlinked and interconnected that within South Asia, we have civil society is very active, science is very clear. It's all only from the political side and policy makers where we feel that enough is not being done to look beyond to see what is the greater threat right now that faces us. And if it is the survival of the region, the stability of the region, that all our attention right now should be focused towards that. So the losses and damages are the economic losses and damages that we can calculate. And then there are the non-economic losses also, which have a much, much higher impact on the lives, livelihoods, physical health, and emotional well-being of people. So we need to take all of that into account, and it's too short a time to go into the details of the data to show how much those losses will be, because every year they are becoming more and more. And I think we've also kind of exhausted the time when we can talk about incremental progress or we can talk about adaptation, because we're soon going to cross when these things will difference anymore. There's a certain stage beyond which you cannot adapt when damage becomes irreversible. So before we reach that point of inflection, I think countries in South Asia, and your platform doing a great job there by bringing voices together to sensitize people that we need to think ourselves as one South Asia. And we need to start working together. So we can talk more on that. And I don't want to take too much time. But I think this is always, let's become the example for other regions to show how collective efforts can benefit each other. work more closely together and be more generous in sharing our knowledge and tools and techniques and technologies that we use. And just think of the next 20, 30 years as a time for cooperation, as a time for protecting this whole naturescape. And within that, my writings, I always come back to the cryosphere, because if there's one thing in South Asia that brings us together, it's we share water from the same mountain sources. So if we do not work together, at least if we do not have control over the glacial melting from global warming, we can work together to reduce the carbon footprint that we are generating. So there are so many areas in which we need to save our snow, we need to protect our cryosphere, because this is such a vast space that the collapse of the third pole will mean the collapse of South Asia. So I think we can make the third pole the point of convergence for cooperation, because it's, a frozen landscape. So everyone, if there's a thaw in relationships, maybe we can keep that landscape frozen as it's meant to be.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well said, Aisha. And to think that some decades ago, when there was that kind of a thaw, despite all the differences, despite all the conflict, was to convert that region into a transnational, park, where biodiversity, it's seen as a biodiversity hotspot, and it was planned to save it as a transnational, transboundary one. So maybe that can come again. But whatever you have said, we are escalating very, very fast. We were talking about tipping points, and now we are talking about the triple planetary crisis. And this has happened within the space of just a few years, less than a decade. And this is also how the numbers the zeros are adding to the numbers, from millions to billions to now trillions is the ask, and the gap is still there. And I think absolutely the most appropriate person to speak to us about how that gap can be filled and the opportunities within the climate finance sector would be Dr. Baru. So how do you see the disappointment that you see around yourself, after the finance COP didn't come up or come through with the figures that the ask was too great, and what is being now promised is not enough? And also the track record makes you a bit untrustworthy, see the other side or the perpetrators as an untrustworthy partner in this negotiation, because they never even fulfilled any of the earlier promises, whether it was for emissions cuts or whether it was for the finances needed. So how does South Asia deal with it? And we do look at Bangladesh when we see the climate adaptation models. There are so many lessons to be learned from how Bangladesh has tackled its coastal belt and many other things. But where does the finance come from? How do we, within South Asia, how can we open those purse strings?
Thank you very much, Afia, for giving me the floor. And I must thank the Sapan team, and particularly Ms. Kabir, for inviting me to this webinar. All the enlightened people I can see here. In fact, before moving into the question you raised, I'd like to share a few points actually that probably related to finance, but they are often skipped because we look at the surface of the negotiation outputs. So let me tell you, one of the very important things that have happened in this COP is the COP actually decided about increasing the finance base of the global financiers. And there you will see that they have specifically called upon China and India to become the contributor to the global climate finance. We have agreed that. And we came back agreeing on this point. That means you see a direct impact coming on South Asia, the biggest country of South Asia. It will have to pay probably significant in the coming days. Secondly, on the goal, you said, as the other panelists said, the 100 billion actually was never met, number one. And on the goal of $300 billion, there are almost 150 developing countries. If you divide by the number of developing countries, it's just less than a peanut. And on the $1.3 trillion, there is a politics of number game. In fact, I said that they have played a very good number game. Let me tell you it very shortly how the number game they played. For example, what Harjeet said that the developing countries demanded $1.3 trillion commitment, but then I asked to some of the experts in the COP that how did you came up to this figure 1.3? Then they said that the Standing Committee of Finance of UNFCCC, they said that this is the amount that we should be asking for. That means we are not deciding our numbers. Numbers are decided by the Standing Committee of Finance, where majority of the members are from the global north. So, and then in this COP, they have already declared that in 2022, the developed countries have already met the pledge of $100 billion per year. Actually, they did not do it. And in another it's called this biennial climate finance assessment report, the UNFCCC Standing Committee of Finance said that they have already, the global climate finance flow has already reached $1.3 trillion on average annually in 2021 and 22. Now, if you look at the number game, you see this report, this accounting is maintained by the people from the global north, and you see that the numbers they are referring to are based on the data released by the OECD, which is the club of the developed countries. And interestingly, when we demanded the $100 billion pledge 5-6 years back, this data was starting to be released from 2015 only. So in fact, they very much knew that at one stage they will need evidence, they will need data to support their claim that they have already done what they pledged. So they started releasing data. Now, using their very own data, they are now saying that they have delivered the pledge. And in the UNFCCC report, they also said that, as I said, in 2021-22, the global flow has already reached $1.3 trillion. Now, if you match this number with the goal set for $1.3 trillion by 2035, it's the same number, which means they have actually given no new commitment. It's the same thing that they have agreed that they have already, the global flow has reached. That one actually is they are setting as the target for 2035. So all the way, I see that as has been said in the beginning of this session, that we have been significantly betrayed, and I felt it going to COP that we have really no power there. Now, one of the reasons why I felt we have no power is because of the negotiation process at the table there, because you cannot really go beyond the G77 China group, being a developing country member. So you cannot really speak of yourself. And one of the gaps I felt, and my delegation team from Bangladesh felt, is the need for particularly regionalism, taking a regional approach before moving into this sort of international, negotiations. And particularly our advisor and also our government. In fact, we released a climate finance landscape of Bangladesh on this COP. And that also, in that document also, we explicitly said that we need to take a regional approach in order to raise this. So I think in the finance domain, we have been significantly betrayed, as I said. And there was another, I think, very important part that has been skipped is the definition of climate finance. We have been discussing in several COPs, but we are not able to define what climate finance is. In fact, I feel that the developed countries actually do not want to define it categorically because they want the development assistance that they provide to developing countries to be counted as climate finance. And they have been doing is in the OECD data that they have been releasing, and that was unofficially that they were doing. But now in this COP, in section 8C of the NCQG document, you will see that they have now officially allowed the developed countries to count in the MDB development finances as climate finances if they want. So they are now allowing officially to do that, which means this deprivation, this betrayal now has become, will be even bigger in the coming days. And we as developing country people, we have already lost the position of claiming that no, you have not given us the delivered the real pledge. So I think on several grounds we have already lost our capacity and ability to negotiate better in the coming COPs. And as in responding to the question you just said, I think in the regional space there are many ways we can really share. For example, because we see that we are affected by the same climate change events, and also we share boundaries, we share resources. So before, if we can take a regional approach, we can sit together and we can discuss ourselves before going to the COP that, okay, what are we likely to face? And then we make our own strategies and own positions. Then actually we can go there in the COP and in the negotiation table. When India speaks out about a particular point, Bangladesh can raise and say that, yes, we endorse this. So in that way, when 5-6 countries together actually stands up and supports the same statements and positions, that makes a stronger pressure on the chair and co-chair of the negotiation meetings that happen together. I'm specifically referring to the process of negotiation there. So I felt that there was no strong vocal from a regional point of view there. And so it's not only this part, the other part, lastly, I would say on, let's say, as Harjeet said, that we need to think about how we can mobilize our domestic finances. I can, as a finance academic and activist, I would say that there are ways how we can really mobilize domestic climate finance. We just need product innovation, process innovation, where South Asian countries really can come together and take really joint actions. The other area of collaboration that I have felt and I see has a strong potential is the technology. You see, all our developing countries, particularly, I would say India is definitely a bit ahead compared to other developing countries. But in terms of technology transfer, we are really in a significantly, I would say that, not in a position to be able to really tackle the climate change impacts. But in the technology transfer also, if we join together and try to bring innovation and try to collectively share technology innovation with each other, I think that can really be economically beneficial, cost effective, and of course efficient for all of us. So this is I think one of the areas. And the last point you said is how we can close the finance gap. My last remark is that actually we will not be able to close the finance gap. That's not possible because as you said rightly, that the gap is every day expanding. It's like you have cancer, you are not giving the appropriate and enough medication, so it will keep worsening. So it's keeping worsening. So extremely difficult. We cannot really close the gap, but I can say that there are huge opportunities to mobilize our domestic finances and to become self-reliant so that we can really become financially independent from those global north on whom we are dependent for money, we are dependent for technology, and we are dependent. So as long as you remain dependent on them, it's really hard to negotiate and win the race. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a reality check that is uncomfortable, and yet it is very necessary to sort of internalize that we have to become self-reliant. And like Aisha also mentioned, that it has to be a regional collaborative approach between the people. And it's as soon as, the sooner we can de-link it with the political conflicts and see to the betterment of the people, because climate change doesn't respect any boundaries. And this is why we have to move closer to each other and go for shared solutions. And, I deliberately kept Kunda as my last panelist to respond to a question, because the media and the advocacy and the knowledge and information is so very important to take this conversation at a higher level. And Kunda, do you think that people in the media understand the conversation that we are listening to even right now? The things that Dr. Baru had told us about the climate finance, the actual climate finance, and the gaps that are increasing. So is the media getting in depth into these conversations? Do they have an understanding, or are there media development organizations like you initiated through PANOS? do we need to invest a little bit more into that to have a serious, not just a skimming at the surface conversation?
Thank you, Afia. Actually, there are two crises that are converging. One is the climate crisis that we're talking about. The other is the crisis in media. Worldwide, in our own countries, mainstream media is in a deep crisis. The business model has collapsed. Journalists are being laid off. The media that does exist, the legacy or linear media that does exist, doesn't have the resources to do investigative journalism that we need at this moment. So as a journalist, I feel very cynical at this moment because of this twin crisis. And what Suborna just said made me even more cynical about the whole process of COP. But what did we expect? I mean, it's no surprise. After all, the last two COPs have been hosted by petrostates. Their presidents have been heads of oil corporations or fossil fuel contractors. So no big surprise there. And the words that come to mind, and were mentioned here, words like hypocrisy, apathy, betrayal, deceit, deception. Yeah, that's what's happening. So I guess we are on our own, as Harjeet said. And we have always been on our own. This was never going to happen. And now with Ukraine and Gaza and everything else and the world distracted by wars elsewhere, there's even less money going around. So if we're on our own, what do we do? Is the question. I think as far as countries like ours are concerned in South Asia, we have no other option but to be prepared ourselves. In large parts of Nepal, up in the mountains, people are adapting already without even knowing what they're adapting to. They're building higher, they're not living near rivers, they're building embankments, the bridges are being built higher, the roads are being built higher. So, and the climate crisis, as we have heard, is a water crisis. There's either too much or too little. Too much, like in Pakistan in 2022, too little, like all the droughts we face. In the last 10 years, 8 winters have been without rain or snow in northern Nepal. So winter drought and the wildfires that they produce. So how do we regulate water? And I think that would be where, as a lot of people said, regional cooperation can really happen because our rivers are transboundary, and nations cannot plan river regulation within their own boundaries. The river will just ignore the boundary. But there are certain things we can't prepare for on our own, and those are things like heat stress in the plains, which will drive, in the coming decades, mass migration within our region and within our countries. People will either be going and seeking higher altitudes or higher latitudes. Ocean expansion is going to make large parts of Bangladesh uninhabitable, and as well as the other coastal regions. So this is going to drive mass migration, and that's the larger crisis which will have major political implications and even possibly even trigger conflict in future. But what we have to remember, and we keep writing this in our country here in Nepal, is that a lot of our problems are structural and they predate the climate crisis. So issues like poverty or inequity or the food insecurity, even floods, we've always had them. And climate breakdown has become an excuse for our governments to blame everything on this global phenomenon that we have no control over. So Western Nepal has been food deficit for the last century because of government neglect and apathy. And so now the government can just say, well, we've had droughts. Or we can say the floods are driving people away from their fields and it's destroyed crops. So we can't let our governments off the hook by claiming that climate change is the only crisis. We had floods in Nepal in September. Yes, it was probably climate induced. We had 6 months of rain in a 30-hour period. And that same thing happened in Pakistan as well. And yeah, so that was the trigger. But what made the floods worse and more destructive and killed 300 people was that there were quarries upstream. There were sand mining along the rivers. And there were crusher industries that were feeding the construction industry in Nepal. So, so we, as journalists, I think what we are trying to do is to look at that structural underlying issue and climate change, which has made the whole pyramid of all the problems we have much worse. And the solution, there's no other solution that better governance internally within our countries, more accountable government, and regional cooperation. You know, as mentioned earlier, the Himalaya is a hotspot in more ways than one. It's heating up because of climate breakdown, but it's also a hotspot because of geopolitics. And several of the countries that border the Himalayan region are now talking to each other. They're actually even fighting wars against each other in the world's highest battlefield. And we really need to get these countries to work together because, as we heard, this is the third pole. This is where all our water comes from. Climate breakdown doesn't just affect Nepal or Pakistan or India, it affects everything downstream. And, you know, as some scientists have pointed out, it's 1.5 billion people living downstream from the Tibetan Plateau and Himalaya in China, Bangladesh, Nepal, Southeast Asia, who will be affected by the drop in the dry season flow of our rivers in the next 20, 25 years. But there are positive signs, and we in the media, we've been trained to look at the negative and be cynical as well. So we focus on what's wrong and these sort of apocalyptic scenarios that we would hear all the time. But there are good things happening. India is going in a big way with renewable energy. So at the moment, it doesn't matter in Delhi if you have an electric car, but it will in the next 10 years as more and more of the energy comes from renewables. Nepal itself is now almost 100% renewable from hydro. Our EV sales, we don't sell too many cars in Nepal, but of the EV sales in the last fiscal year, 80% were electric. Our petroleum imports from India dropped by 10% in the last 5 months compared to the previous 5 months. So there are things happening, and all this has been made possible. And let's not, you know, be too miserly about thanking China for all this. It's all been made possible because all these the technology is now cheaper because of China. And the West putting tariffs on these things and without looking at the larger global picture, it's just so hypocritical and short-sighted just to punish geopolitically a rival economic power. I think I'll end there before I go on too long. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And you know, it's important to talk about somebody who's part of the industry, which informs the world, you know, of the problems and of the solutions. And this is where, you know, even as a journalist, rather media development specialist as well, I feel worried that are we investing into in-depth reporting or not? Because climate crisis is no longer just climate change; it's a climate crisis. And we see very incidental reports. You know, some big disaster strikes, and then we see the media covering it from all angles. But there's no continuous thread which can look at the issue, the science of it, the human angle, the rights-based angles. And, you know, we need to, you know, find that nexus as well. So I'll go back to Harjeet. And Harjeet, you know, is it cynicism or is it realism? The words that have been used by all the panelists. The disappointment is very, very real. It's almost palpable that there was so much pledged. And this is not just, you know, the finance COP that has failed to deliver. From Paris onwards, there's been this sort of a downslide, very loud claims and loud commitments and expectations from countries which are vulnerable are at par with the expectations that we have from the perpetrators of climate change. So how do we move from disappointment, and how do we become more insular and look at the region, which is fraught with so many problems, like Aisha mentioned, that without delinking it from the political issues, how do we move forward?
Thank you, Afia, for asking that very important question. And let me pick up the word that Kunda mentioned in terms of our problems in the region in terms of being structural. The same challenge we are facing globally. The fact is that the West is now realizing that it's a multipolar world, and they don't want to let their power go. So imagine on one hand, they are not giving us that $100 billion annually, which we know is full of double counting and is 70% loans, and it's going to make us, far more impoverished as developing countries if we depend on their type of climate finance. So the reality is that it's not a climate fight that we are fighting. It's an economic fight. It's a trade fight. And we will see that more and more with the kind of trade barriers now West is putting to insulate themselves, but not really sharing the technology and finance that they are obligated to as part of several agreements. And as I mentioned in the chat, that let's not forget about what's going to happen next month, in the next 22 days, when Trump is going to take over and is going to cause much more damage, not only to the US, it's going to reverse a lot of policies that have been hard won in terms of promoting renewable energy. And we are talking about the US, which is the biggest historical polluter and now the top fossil fuel producer. And he's going to go for drill, baby, drill. So that's the kind of world we are living in, where it's becoming much more inward looking and really moving away from the international cooperation and solidarity that is required the most at this moment. And multilateralism is really hanging by a thread. So as you rightly said, Afia, in this situation, I think we need to adopt a twin track approach. One, as it has been said by several people, we need to start looking at what we can do as a region. And I want to also talk about some of the positives. Let's also recognize the kind of resources we have to move to renewable energy on our own. Look at the abundant renewable energy resources in terms of solar, wind, and hydro. If we have really genuine collaboration between countries, we can actually become renewable as a region. And we know how Nepal is already 100% renewable. So there's a lot in the region in terms of resources. So we need to start cooperating much more, sharing best practices, coordinating our policies, and at the same time, jointly advocating for the increased international support. So on one hand, we need to coordinate among ourselves, but that's not going to be enough. If US is going to continue with the fossil fuel production, if EU is going to put more trade barriers, we need to start also calling them out a lot more and in a much more coordinated manner. And I would also agree with the point that was made earlier by Suborna, that we don't have any coordination, and we have been attending these international processes. We don't even meet before that. We don't coordinate during these processes, and we don't even coordinate later in terms of calling them out. So our coordination has to be based on equity, rights, and justice. That should be absolutely at the center. And we know the kind of cooperation that we need at this moment is going to be helping us, as I said earlier, not only in terms of energy transition, but also building our resilience, which is absolutely needed. So resilience for this region is absolutely fundamental. So, and it will eventually improve the regional stability that we need most, and give us economic growth, which is far more resilient. That's what we need. So let me repeat, twin track approach, coordinate among ourselves, share resources, and share the kind of technology we have, and develop plans so that we can make our region resilient, but also show the unity to call the historical polluters and rich countries and big corporations who are causing damage, and they need to be held to account.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that's, this seems to be the rallying cry now. But Aisha, as you mentioned, how do we de-link it from politics? Because as Suborna has said, that we need to meet before the COP. The people who are negotiating and the people who are, who can wield some influence. Is there anything on the horizon which we can call, like, you through your coalition have been holding these pre-COP meetings. So can there be a pre-COP South Asia or South Asia pre-COP meeting? Do you see that on the horizon now, especially because it's so very clear that whatever we need is not really going to be handed to us, even if we demand it once we. So how do we, move forward in a climate of distrust and apathy? I'm choosing as polite word that I could come up with. I would go with the words that Harjeet used, actually.
Afia, I think, the answer is very simple. We need political will to do that. And let's be very honest here, the entire South Asian region is actually held hostage because of the dysfunctional relationship between India and Pakistan. So unless these two countries don't agree to work together and take this agenda forward jointly, nothing is going to happen and nothing is going to change. And with India being the bigger country, the larger economy, it has to step forward and take the initiative to say, let's take a regional approach. And nothing, to my mind, would be better than for the region to have a conference of parties, agree on its regional nationally determined contributions, and take the whole agenda forward from one common platform. That's how your voice will be more powerful and you will be heard. But we do not collaborate within the region, and then we demand from the global community resources and finances for individual countries, which break down into smaller units and then don't have the same impact that is needed to make change happen. So I think this question of political will and for policy makers to see beyond, and that's probably the biggest challenge to civil society and to the media, is to how do you make them recognize that the larger, greater threat that is looming over entire South Asia, in which either we all move forward and make ourselves resilient or we go under. Because it's not a question of one country getting ahead of the other country without working together. We have to work together. It's not just a need, it's become an imperative now. And if we all share the water from the same mountain resources, then we have to work together to at least say that, okay, let's start reducing the black carbon footprint. Let's start conducting joint or coordinated research to understand our own cryosphere better. Right now, we don't know really what's happening in the Himalayas. They don't know what's happening in the Karakoram. We don't share data. We don't even share data on telemetric information of water flows, on early warning. So, there's no humanity in this. We have to, if we agree fundamentally that it's people who matter and it's people and their lives that really make a difference, then we should all be working together. There should be no second thoughts on saying, let's make climate the foremost agenda for ourselves right now and put everything else on the back burner or on hold for the next 10 or 20 years and till we stabilize. And I would agree to say, that we cannot stop climate change impacts from happening at the pace which they're happening, because all trends are telling us that the amount of reduction that is needed in emissions is not likely to happen. So let's not be delusional about that. That change, that carbon is going into the atmosphere and the impacts will have to be borne by us. How do we reduce our risks? How do we reduce and minimize our hardships is the approach that I'm looking at right now. How can we make less people suffer? And within our own country, like Kunda had said, the structural reforms are fundamental. We have made climate change the boogeyman right now. So everything is dumped on climate change. And that takes away focus from the internal responsibility that governments have towards their own people. Because if we want truly to claim climate justice from the global community, we have to be seen very clearly to be giving climate justice to our own people. So within the region, within our own countries, we have to see what is the footprint of the rich and who is paying the price. And since I work with mountain communities myself, I see that very clearly, that it's the downstream communities who are using the fossil fuels, and it's the upstream communities who are paying a very heavy price. They're marginalized, they're isolated, they don't have the resources or the means of implementation or technology, and they are bearing the brunt, and they're in the forefront. So I think we have to take a very realistic view and not become overly emotional about this, but put the facts down to say, this is our internal responsibility. We will do this much ourselves, and beyond that, this is your responsibility. And then we have a much, much stronger claim to demand justice from the global community. But if as a region, we have so many issues within us among countries, and we are not able to resolve them, or to even sit at the negotiating table right now among our countries and say, these are the critical issues, these are the priority actions that we need to act upon right now. How do we take this agenda forward? So I think the first and foremost need is for policymakers in the region to agree to sit together and use climate as the entry point for a common conversation on which issues are agreed upon and then taken collectively. If we can do that, I think that will be a major, major step forward in concrete terms to say, yes, we have demonstrated political will to take this agenda seriously and own it ourselves as well.
Thank you, Aisha. And, a quarter of humanity lives in this region, and we cannot be unmindful of the problems that they face, which are of our own making. So we cannot absolutely just, lay all the blame at the doorstep of climate change, of the things that we can fix ourselves. And, it was like Dr. Suborna mentioned, that there are technology fixes, there are shared learnings that we can lean on. But how do you think, you gave the suggestion, maybe you have a pathway in your mind, that how can we have a sort of a pre-COP gathering to take a united stand at the COP and, present the case for South Asia?
Before responding, can I share my screen just to show two images that could be really useful for the discussion?
Sure. Ekta?
Yeah, first one. Yeah, can you share the two images? Can you see the image?
Okay. Yes, we can.
This is a very recent estimate we did to measure the climate debt burden of the most vulnerable countries. And you see, except India, all the South Asian countries are there. Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Bangladesh having the largest climate debt burden among all. 20 years of estimates you can see. Now, if we look at the second image, you see, we assessed actually how climate debt vulnerability is increasing in these most vulnerable countries. So you see, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar are three of the most climate debt vulnerable now already because of taking too much loans for climate actions. So as Harjeet said, that 70% of the finances are coming in the form of loan, and it's actually, in my estimate, it's roughly 90%. So I would say that actually we are now moving into three-dimensional crisis. The first crisis is the climate itself. The second one is the crisis of finance, the inequity and injustice in finance. So the people who need to pay, they are not paying. It's an injustice. And the third crisis is looming over, is the debt crisis, I tell you. And in the South Asian region, I'm sure Harjeet is nodding to my, we will agree. In the South Asian region, as I see, except India, all of us are in an imminent threat of taking too much, climate debt. So I think the way the COP29 outcomes came up in the coming days, I can almost certainly say that there will be more of debt finances less of grants finances. They promote blended finance more and more so that they can push us to the market-based financing more than collecting public finances. So three-dimensional crises are now actually, these three domains crises are actually merging together, converging together, and the future is really, really tough. And second remark I would say is, as Harjeet said, that we have to be on our own. And do you know, interestingly, we are already on our own. All the global finances are flowing across the world over the last, let's say, 5-6 years. 84% of the finances are domestically mobilized. Only 16% came from the international sources, particularly the global north. And for Bangladesh, we estimated as a team before the COP, we saw it's about 86% of the finances utilized for climate actions were from domestic sources. We are already on our own. So we probably have to, as I said, actually, we probably have to, connect together, join together, and, find out innovative ways how we can collectively become more independent, more reliable on ourselves, so that we can really protect ourselves, but at the same time, we collectively can really keep demanding the justice that we need. On the politics of politics, I'll say that finance is all about politics. So we cannot really separate politics from finance. There are more money have been invested for wars across the world than climate actions, right? So we know everything. We understand. The leaders also understand everything in the global north, but things are not working in the right direction. So politics cannot be really. It's from my view that it's unrealistic to say that politics need to be separated, but probably we have to be, as a collective region, we have to be intelligent enough how we can leverage politics to push our agenda into the COP and in the global. So that's probably the best way to think in the line of, so that we come together and use our political power as much as we can. And I would also a bit add on the media responses. My experience is I talked to a couple of Indian media about the Standing Committee of Finance, Climate Finance report, and it's called Monga Bay and other platforms also. What I see from the global discourses from the media, I think media has a very strong influence in building a narrative, right, in the community, in the society, and also creating pressure on the governments and all the parties. Now, my understanding is that many of the media produced excellent reports, but also most of the media who were representing their media in the COP did not have the right understanding to analyze the granularity and quality of the characteristics of and the terms and conditions of all the finance things that were happening. For example, in the international climate finance proposals that I evaluate on behalf of Bangladesh as part of Ministry of Finance, we see that the proposals always have provisions for de-risking the investors, the finance providers. Then I asked one of the parties, in a GCF proposal, actually, I asked them, look, you are protecting the investors, but you are not protecting the people who are receiving the finances. Now, why it is important? For example, for Bangladesh, you know that we had a series of FX decline, foreign exchange rate weakening scenario, and the dollar that we bought $65 now are $120. Now, if you took loan, for example, 20 years back, now you have to pay at a much higher rate, right, to buy the dollars and repaying the international loans. So I asked them, do you have any FX embedding, FX risk hedging mechanism within our proposal, within your proposal? They said no. So which means the recipient countries, particularly in like us, the borrowing parties, maybe a private sector, maybe a subnational or national government, whoever it is, but whenever we are taking debts, we must ensure that there are enough hedging mechanism placed there. So this is one of the examples, just I'm saying that this is one of the examples of the granularity and the technicality of the terms and conditions that are associated with the financing mechanisms that are in place now. If we do not really understand those things, particularly media, they will not be able to develop the right narrative. So all the media are now reporting mostly on the surface level, how much we demanded, how much we got, but we are not. So this is where probably we need to be more focused on. And on to respond to your question, SARC has failed. So I'll finish in 30 seconds. SARC has failed to be a team. It's my personal viewpoint. I saw in COP how African Union raised their common voices. I saw in COP how ASEAN countries were aligned together. I saw the small island developing states were aligned together. But in South Asia, there is no coordination. SARC has failed, so we have no coordination. I think this is an excellent idea, what Aisha said. We can really think of having a regional COP first, and then discuss ourselves, take our position, and then we move on to the international domain. And I'm sure that Sapan can also take these initiatives for sitting together. Why not? Why not we, from every country, we arrange something. Can we start the discussion, sitting together, or a meeting or a conference, something like that? Then gradually, probably Sapan can really actively think of moving into organizing this type of COPs. The last thing is, as I said, actually the finance is likely to dry up in the coming days, and we have really potential to collaborate on. Yeah, thank you very much. I think I would stop here. Afia, you are mute.
So I'm sorry. This is a very interesting and very complex and complicated discussion, and we wanted to keep it very simple. So obviously we can't go in depth. I would love to listen to all of you for much longer, but I'm not at the liberty. There were questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take questions. I will go to Kunda for the final round, and I must say, I already have white hair, but after this kind of discussion and the gloom and doom, probably if there weren't any, few left, they have also turned white now. So Kunda, this is we come back to that the narrative building through the media, legacy media, we've all sort of given up on, and I guess I know we in Pakistan have, and you seem to voice the same opinion. How important, and how, if you can just quickly just tell me, what role can the new media play? Because that still has eyeballs, and it gets across borders. It's not confined into just.
Let's not give up on the legacy media. I think not just because we're all dinosaurs, but also because legacy media has a footprint on social media as well, on networks, on platforms.
Yeah.
We have our own accounts. We post stuff there, and there are many examples of legacy and linear media which have very large footprints in cyberspace. And the message is getting across. I mean, we were influencers before the word was invented, right? And we can still influence policy, especially policy. And there, I think, is where media advocacy really works. Very briefly, is by framing climate breakdown as an environmental issue, you're putting it in the middle pages or in the bottom of the TV news lineup in the evenings. By making it a political and economic story, you make it page one. And it is a political economic story. The solutions are political and economic. So like in Nepal, what we say is that, we're not trying to save the planet by going to renewables. We're trying to save our economy. 25% of our imports is petroleum. It's going up really fast. Let's try to, cap it by turning to electric transport and household electric use instead of LPG. So that kind of framing makes sense both to policymakers as well as households and communities. On regional cooperation, yeah, I agree that SARC is semi-comatose. Someone said multilateralism is dead globally. Bilateralism is the way it's going in South Asia. Not even bilateralism. Actually, it's going unilateral, especially vis-a-vis smaller countries in South Asia. One last thing, the debt crisis. We've seen in the last 2 or 3 years major disasters in the Himalayan region of infrastructure, mainly hydropower projects. You saw Sikkim last year in October, where a $1 billion dam was washed off by a glacial lake outburst flood. In Nepal, in September, with the rains that I talked about earlier, we lost half our generation capacity, half of the national grid generation capacity in a space of 3 or 4 hours. Some of it is back, but our most expensive hydro project is still out of action. And to fix those, we need to take another loan on top of the loan that we borrowed to build it. So there is a multiplier of loans here that's happening. And as someone said, the dollar exchange rate makes it much more difficult to pay back. Thank you.
Thank you. I would love to have taken this, to another hour maybe, but we must, conclude here. I'm very, very grateful to all the panelists, Harjeet, Aisha, Dr. Suborna, and Kunda, because this is such a rich discussion that you have sort of opened our eyes to something not very pleasant, but something that is an imperative that we do something about it. We need to come together. The world is not going to help us. It's this region which is vulnerable, and it is this region which has shared problems, and those problems need some shared solutions. So once again, thank you very much for your time, for your very, very valuable insights. I wish you well. And Namrata, back to you. Thank you for the patience, because I know that our time overruns have been there.
Thank you very much. I
Thank
think I
you.
have time.
Take care.
Thank you, Afia. Excellent moderation and excellent speakers. I just wanted to listen more and also listen to more questions, but time is always running. I will now request Dr. Soumya Dutta, a founding member of Sapan, to present the resolution that we have prepared with inputs from our panelists as well as Sapan volunteers. Soumya, over to you.
Thank you, Namrata. On behalf of Sapan members, panelists, and participants of today's discussion, I will now read out the resolution of today's webinar on Beyond COP29, South Asia's Climate Change Challenges, a call for Southasian Solidarity. 29 December 2024, COP29 South Asia Solidarity Resolution. The Southasia Peace Action Network, Sapan, stands in solidarity with the people of the region seeking relief and justice from the adverse impacts of climate change. Home to a quarter of the globe's population, South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate shocks, ranging from rising sea levels to devastating flooding and intensifying heat waves to droughts, to name just a few. To this region, climate change is not a future threat. The devastating impacts to lives, livestock, infrastructure, economy, and habitat it is facing are in keeping with the triple planetary crisis. The developing and underdeveloped countries of the region are disproportionately burdened with the cost of dealing with these impacts. The 29th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP, agreed in November to deliver at least $300 billion per year by 2035 to developing and vulnerable countries, a climate financing target that is 3 times more than the $100 billion per year goal that countries first set 15 years ago, but far less than the $1.3 trillion per year that the vulnerable countries have sought. Given the environmental and financial challenges faced by South Asia, Sapan calls upon the polluters, the historic emitters, and perpetrators of climate change to make good on their emissions cuts commitments based on equity and fair share. They must provide the needed finances required by the vulnerable countries for meeting their mitigation targets and adaptation imperatives. Experts have shown that this goal can be met without requiring any significant additional budgetary allocation from the developed nations beyond their already pledged increases. Sapan calls upon governments to negotiate an equitable access to finances and technology to transition from fossil fuels to cleaner energy alternatives. Sapan calls upon all regional stakeholders to rally together so the call for climate justice resonates at forums that have the resources and political power to make it happen. Since climate change knows no borders, shared resolutions to shared problems will have to be worked out by taking a regional, cooperative, and collaborative approach. This includes issues related to climate change, like floods and heat waves, as well as environmental pollution in the water bodies and air pollution. A transnational, transboundary approach on the lines of Track 2 dialogues can pool ideas and leverage greater support at international forums by showing a solidarity of purpose. As an umbrella regional platform, Southasia Peace Action Network calls for the governments and peoples of the region to work towards soft borders, engage in economic cooperation, knowledge and technical skills sharing, and collaboration on all issues, including climate change. I request you all to please endorse this resolution by show of thumbs up or message in Zoom chat or with a comment on the YouTube live.
Seconded.
You're all doing that, and over to you,
Seconded.
Afia. Would Namrata, you take it?
Okay, I'll take
You have
it
to
now.
unmute Afia.
Thank you, Fauzia, and thank you,
Right.
Afia. And as Fauzia has said, we'd really like to request everybody to please support the resolution. I suppose that the House endorsed this resolution. And can I ask if anybody would like to second it?
Seconded.
Thank you very much. The House has passed the resolution and we will make it available on the Southasia Peace website, as well as send it to all of you to share it with your circles and media contacts. Now, I again want to thank everybody, all the presenters, Fauzia and Afia, for making this webinar so interesting and fruitful so far. And now we are at a stage when the discussion and its salient points plus the resolution can be summarized. And who better at condensing such a vast field into a few remarks than Soumya Dutta, who for the past 30 years has been actively working with people's movements across South Asia and is a leading voice from the Global South in the Global Climate Justice Campaign. He has played a key role in initiating one of India's biggest people's science campaigns and authored and contributed to a dozen books and written over 125 articles on climate, energy, water, river, and related issues. I request Soumya Dutta to kindly share his thoughts as closing remarks for our discussions. Over to you, Soumya.
I don't see him. He was on a train.
Yeah, I had also heard that he was on the train and waiting to share his closing remarks.
Can someone phone
somebody please phone him?
I think Lolly's contacted him.
Okay. But I think while we wait for him, I think it won't be...
So he's not answering. I just saw the message from
Okay.
Kavita. He has dropped out and he's not answering.
Right.
He did send a message halfway through saying he was worried as to whether his signal would last or whether he might have to get onto that train. So it looks like he's not around. What a pity, really.
Okay. All right. I think what we can do now is, Afia, if you have, you doing a wonderful moderation of the whole discussion, would you like to just say a couple of things as your thoughts that the thoughts might have come when you listen to our wonderful panelists. Can you just say a couple of words before we close?
So I'll try to sort of recap it because I was very
Yes,
busy
please.
listening to what they were saying. But the consensus was that we do need to have a regional approach. We need to cooperate, collaborate with each other, and there's the issue of like I mentioned also that quarter of a billion, sort of quarter of humanity lives within this region, and it's a very, very vulnerable region. So all the panelists were while they expressed their disappointment at the outcome of the COP, they see a way forward by having a regional approach to bring shared perspective at those international forums, because in that solidarity they may be able to push the needle which hasn't moved for so many years. And very rightly, that warning has been sounded by Harjeet that last time when Trump took the office of the president, one of his first executive actions was to walk out of the Paris Treaty. And he has been very almost belligerent in the manner of trying to contain China, seeing that as their biggest the threat. And the money that is being poured in by that, although it's not his government yet, but they have plenty of money to pour in wars, etc. But he is going to be inward looking, and how the world fares because of their decisions or because of their the fossil fuel proliferation that we are anticipating. The things are not good, and the only way we can make our stand visible and resonant is through a display of solidarity between the South Asian countries, which do share not just the geographical but the environmental problems and environment. The geography unites us. The history and the politics may divide us, but the geography unites us in the kind of shared solutions that we are looking for, especially in the times of a triple planetary crisis. Because if it isn't climate change that we can control, the environmental degradation across our region, whether it is through plastic pollution or it is through the degradation of our water resources, is something that we can sit down together and find a fix for. So the main thing is the coming together. If SARC is dead, then maybe there can be a new pre-COP or some other forum where we can sit together and join our heads together and come up with these solutions. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Afia. Thank you very much. I know you were listening to the speakers, but you did a wonderful job in summing it up quickly.
Thank you.
Actually, when I was listening to all the speakers too, I was, the two things that was resonating continuously was the fact that within our own countries, the governments have to be accountable. And then, we have to be able to make sure that we make those who should be accountable really accountable. And then we should all, the South Asians, join together to take our agenda forward. I was hearing all that. Thank you, everybody. All the speakers once more, Afia and Fawzia again. And I would like to stress here that this is something Sapan would like to facilitate taking forward for widespread impact in the region. Thank you all for joining. We really value your feedback about our work. Please help us in improving by filling in the feedback form, which our volunteers will post in the chat box and on the YouTube comment section. Kindly post it in the chat and the YouTube also. Before we close, as many of you know, Sapan is a voluntary organization, but we need your help to keep things going. We are excited to support our partner media organization, Sapan News, fundraising for the second year running. All donations made by year end will be matched double by Newsmatch, a collaborative fund in the US, supporting more than 475 nonprofit newsrooms. So your support will help Sapan News to move ahead too. If you can kindly contribute, no amount is too small or too big. All donations are tax deductible. Please share this appeal with your circles to help us reach our year-end goal. I request our volunteers to share the donate link, please, in the chat box. If it's already not done, kindly share it once more. And on the YouTube comment section too. Thank you. A huge thanks to everyone who has made this event possible, and to all of you watching us and being with us throughout this webinar. Besides those who you see on the screen today are many volunteers without whom we couldn't have done this. Special thanks to the Sapan team, volunteers and advisors, Ekta Kapoor, Sarita Bortola, Pragyan Srivastava, Sara Arshad, Sher Afghan, Sher Ali Khan, Amina Said, Fauzia Diba, Bina Sarwar, Khushi Kabir, Khawar Mumtaz, Kavita Srivastav, and Lalita Ramdas. And if I missed anyone, I want to thank them all
You missed
too.
Meena Sarwar.
Bina Sarwar, I said, because I was
Okay.
I was trying to make sure I pronounce her Sarwar correctly.
Okay. Thank you.
I try to memorize, learn the pronunciation. A special
Thank you,
thanks.
everybody.
Our special thanks again to all the panelists, Aisha Khan, Harjeet Singh, Kunda Dixit, and Dr. Suborna Barua for the exceptional insights, and Afia Salam for moderating this endless subject so efficiently, and of course, joining in and doing the summarizing too when I requested you. So efficiently with excellent inputs of her own. Thank you all and look forward to seeing you next time. Remember to please fill the feedback form and to also contribute to the valuable work that we are doing. Goodbye for now.